Hello, everyone. I'm Jason Cohen, the author of An Introduction to the Art and Science of Chinese Tea Ceremony. Today, we're discussing Book 1, Chapter 6, Section 3, Classifying the Classifier. Here to talk about this chapter is our editorial team, Patrick Penny and Ryan Ahn. Hello, Pat. Hello, Ryan.
Hey, Jason.
Hello.
My first question, do you agree that connoisseurship is reductionist in its natural tendencies?
Yes, we tried to have a discussion about this, I think, in an offline forum, where we thought about, what forms of connoisseurship are not reductionist and how can we find systems that don't break things down into their base elements. And I think we talked about it for probably about an hour before we really didn't land on anything that wasn't reductionist. So I think when humans want to understand something, we tend to break it down into smaller bite-sized pieces. We put things into boxes. It helps form a knowledge system that we can use as a framework. And so often the way we do that is by breaking things down, reducing them into elements or parts that are similar or dissimilar. So I would say yes to that question.
I would echo what Pat's saying. There's always information loss whenever you impose some hierarchy or some classification scheme. And at its base level, it's certainly reducing, being reductionist. But then also the further down the rabbit hole you go in connoisseurship, you start to understand where those rules break down even further. And both in tea and other things like wine or coffee, that's where some of the most interesting products can live. The ones that are exception to the rule are the ones that are very difficult to classify. But if you have to put connoisseurship in a nutshell, it is certainly reductionist in the way it teaches new practitioners how to think through whatever the unit of enjoyment is, whether it be tea or wine or coffee or whatever.
To give an example within the tea world, I think some more spiritual practices, groups like Global Tea Hut, try and approach tea from a standpoint of holism, right? Trying to look at tea in its whole and in its full part. But even then within their writings and their publications, they still, with a lot of preface, of course, still take a reductionist standpoint when they break things down to explain what makes a specific tea unique or individual and how to enjoy that tea. So even groups that try and take a very holistic, point of view on the connoisseurship of a product, you will still have to break things down to educate others.
And just to put more color on what Pat's saying, the classification schemes that we see in tea are like type of tea. So the differences between oolong, green tea, red tea, et cetera. And that's particularly around production parameters. But we can also view things through the lens of old tree, like gushu versus plantation. We can talk in terms of elevation. We can talk in terms of other processing factors, like a really light woadway or piling during the fermentation of shopware, or a really heavy one. So it's all of these frameworks, when you bring them together, really help a new person learn and break down and organize the knowledge in their own heads. So they have a set of principles from which then to make inferences when evaluating a new tea or learning something new.
So you would both agree that there are limitations to the practical application of hierarchies?
Always. There are always exceptions. And also, it's not static. There are certainly some teas that have been invented in recent memory that would not have historically fit. So they need to be dynamic. So a really good modern example is the use of refrigeration during withering in high mountain plantations in Taiwan. It's just a technology that was not being utilized until relatively recently. Different processing styles and methods, let's say like woadway for shopware production, was only invented in the 70s, which led to an entirely new classification system for fermentation. Now we make a distinction between a more dry fermentation and a wet fermentation.
Yeah, and I think just to circle back to what you were saying, Jason, this classification system and hierarchies certainly have their limitations. So as to what Ryan was saying, they should never interfere with the evolution or progression of these different groups or classifications of tea. Hopefully farmers will continue to innovate, processors, factories, etc. And whether or not there exists a classification for the product that they're thinking of creating, hopefully they continue to create them anyway, as we've seen. And over time, connoisseurs, tea consumers, etc., will learn how to place that new product within their knowledge system.
But do they? Right? What is an example of a contemporary cultural truth, the Western tea classification system, that's outgrown its usefulness or which no longer reflects our reality?
Different classification systems can be used at sort of different levels of connoisseurship. So at the very mass market side of things, one classification system that is used to communicate quality is what part of the leaf or which leaf a tea is from, whether or not it's from the bud or the first leaf, second leaf, or tertiary leaves, right? So in a lot of mass market marketing of tea and communicating what quality is, they'll say, the closer you get to the bud or the bud itself is the most, has the most nutrients, is the most flavorful, is the most concentrated. But certainly anyone who learns more about tea and flavors that can be introduced, you can have lots of great tea that is made from only tertiary leaves. That's certainly higher quality than some bud tea if it's grown in some plantation.
What is a more extreme example? Can we use an example of Cultivar Oolong? Does that exist? And what would we make of it if it did exist?
Yeah, Cultivar Oolong does exist. I've tasted some samples of it. I think it's not common for a good reason. It wasn't very good. But that's not to say that a farmer or processor, someone passionate, can't get it to that stage. From a classification standpoint, the way I look at it is it was processed like an oolong. So within my framework of understanding, even though the cultivar is not a traditional one or the varietal, I still place it within oolong as a category. But using my knowledge of Shangpu or maybe other like Bai Cha or something Hong Cha, right, that I've tasted using Diet Cultivar, I can kind of form this network of, okay, this is what Diet Cultivar tastes like in different processing forms. And then with this example, I've now tasted it as an oolong, but it's still just, I firmly place it within the oolong classification for me when I experienced that.
Have you had Mao Cha that you enjoy?
Yeah, definitely.
Have you had reddened Mao Cha that you enjoy?
I would say that I enjoyed it as in I could drink it now and it was tasty now, but I know that it down the line is not going to maintain that same level of quality.
But isn't a reddened Mao Cha just a Diet Cultivar Oolong?
I guess it's going to come down to the processing. So I think a reddened Mao Cha is going to receive some degree of oxidation, but does it go through traditional shaking and bruising the way an oolong would be made? Probably not. It's going to come down to the skill of the farmer. So if it was just reddened to soften the flavor, it probably didn't go through the same exact steps that someone would do if they were really truly trying to make an oolong. I think for all intents and purposes, the answer to your question is probably yes. A reddened Mao Cha is basically an oolong. But when you get into the nitty gritty, and that's what we like to do, no, they can certainly be different.
Well, and quite frequently, too, it's trying to pass as older pu'er.
Or drink it now pu'er.
Or drink it now, sure. But it's still very much trying to sit within that classification, even though it's technically an oolong.
To harp on this point, right? Dao doth beg the question, what is an oolong? Can we start a branch of oolongology in order to determine if it is or is not an oolong? What is it about the classification system that dominates? Is it the level of oxidation or is it something else, such as the bruising?
Yeah, I would say from a very broad point of view, I believe that the way people classify it is looking at oxidation level. So certainly we have a spectrum of oolongs that are basically very lightly oxidized to almost no oxidation. which is maybe where I think you might press upon Jason, right? Some very lightly oxidized baozhongs. Are they truly oolongs? And then we get really far into the spectrum as well, to the point where, if you wanted to also really dig into the weeds, you could say, is a very highly oxidized oolong just a black tea? So there certainly is this gray zone on both sides that is not very well defined. But I would say in general, people say a tea with some level of oxidation is an oolong, not fully oxidized and certainly not unoxidized.
My cutoff is 90% oxidation for oolong versus black tea.
Yeah, you take out your oxidation meter and you say, nope, this one's 91%, so it is no longer an oolong.
Hongcha. Yeah, it's an oral oxidation meter, but yes.
So electric tongue, got it.
In 1827, He Chuan Yao wrote, discerning even the slightest difference between what appears to be similar, discerning the underlying similarity from appearances of difference. What has changed in our classification system since 1827?
I would say for those of us practicing within, I would say, the literati, right, lineage and framework, nothing. That's certainly the goal. I think, we aim to be able to detect the slightest and smallest differences and also lump things together with the smallest similarities. But I would say for the mass, public, that's usually not the goal. We're trying to make big buckets so that everyone can understand things nice and neatly. For us, I believe that, as He Chuan Yao had said, that's how we're doing it now.
We are but the people of the past, captured here in the present.
Almost 200 full years ago.
What is a form of aesthetic distinction you make that classifies you? For example, I indiscriminately judge an individual's coffee order, which probably says more about me than it says about them. Would you like a latte, Ryan?
Only if it's PSL. It's a great question, Jason. I don't have an immediately good answer.
Yeah, give me a couple seconds. I got to think about this one too.
I guess one thing that I judge everyone is their water quality and the vessel that they're pouring from. I think is really important. And there's a pretty, I've noticed, at least anecdotally, there's a pretty big difference between the people who really care about water quality and about pour. They tend to also classify things in a similar way, approach tea in a similar way as well. Because anyone who's been doing this long enough knows that water, if you have bad water, you're going to have bad tea. And if that's forgotten about, it's kind of that invisible thing that can ruin a session.
So that's definitely really good, Ryan. I like that you brought it to tea, because I was going to say, when people when people are in line, they get up to the cash register and they're about to order and they don't know what they want yet, I immediately start judging them. So that was my indiscriminate bias. But applied to tea, when specifically if I go to someone's tea room, or if I see pictures on Instagram of someone with dirty teaware, using dirty teaware, bloggers, right, posting pictures of dirty teaware. I'm not here to shame them via this episode of our podcast, but I certainly do think I have bias when I start seeing those. I just start already thinking about, if you're not cleaning your wares properly, how focused are you truly on brewing your tea? How much time do you dedicate to tea? And I think that was something that was kind of ingrained in us from a previous teacher, right? So we've studied with some, Taiwanese teachers, some teachers from China. And I think an underlying current, right, within any kind of practice is cleanliness. And so that's something that I think was heavily ingrained in us. And so it's really, when I look at other people's dirty teaware, it's more a reflection of where I've come from versus their practice. They can do whatever they want, whatever's good for them. But I think I immediately start making judgments when I see dirty teaware.
That's their entire 3 years worth of education as a patina.
I mean, it's true. You can see right there how much they practice. But additionally to what Ryan said, I think dry style versus wet style. I definitely make some quick judgments, I think, when I see people brewing wet style. So whether with a tray or just doing a good old splashy fun time, kind of pouring wildly, letting water get everywhere. I think we've been told by quite a few teachers that the gong fu, right, of gong fu cha, is being able to direct the water, direct the tea in exactly the way that you want, having skill and control over it. That's the gong fu, and so I've definitely taken that to heart in the past 9 or 10 years of my practice. So when I see people doing splashy fun time, I think I start to make judgments pretty quick too, which is, as you said, Jason, more character flaw of mine, but that's what we do. We make distinctions, right?
Well, back when tea was something enjoyed outside and high mountains on soaring vistas, things you had to walk past Buddhist hermitages high up on mountains, face treacherous trail paths on sheer edges of the cliff in order to get to constructed gazebos. Back then, you had to carry all of your water with you, so every drop was precious.
Yeah, no splashy fun time. Don't get that all over the ground or your tray. Save that precious, delicious water.
Can you give an example of an impressive distinction, just a pure display of cultural capital in the tea tradition that impressed you?
Yeah, I think we all have experienced this one. For the three of us on this call, we have some tea practitioner friends, teachers, etc., that have taken out like gold kettles, golden teapots. I think anytime you see a ware like that, beyond the dazzling radiance of the ware, you have to think about, this was probably a custom made item. This practitioner had to have, find someone to make this, source it, etc. So I think when I see that makes a distinction for me.
When I see people bring out silver or gold wares, my usual impression is actually economic capital versus cultural capital. What is something that is purely cultural capital? A display of knowledge that impressed you? You should talk about me, Ryan. I've identified so many of your pu'er cakes.
My pu'er cakes? What do you mean?
When you wander back from China and you're like, do you know what this is? I'm not telling you to use that example.
I don't know if I remember you identifying. What did you identify?
It was your pretty face, ugly butt cake.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah, you rightfully identified it as garbage. I mean, the right answer is like the heart with the silver kettle. That was really cool. I've never seen it since. I've never even seen copies of it. And that is the only time I really distinctly remember you being impressed, Jason. Like your mouth was wide open. You were like, whoa. And you recognized it immediately that was not a normal thing.
Yeah, that was interesting.
Yeah, I don't have a good answer for this one off the top of my head.
There was the funny situation, Pat, with you and I at Mr. Tsay's shop where I keep grabbing things saying, can I buy this? And he keeps going, that's not for sale. That's not for sale. That's not for sale. Like everything is laid out as if it's for sale. Like every piece that I grabbed.
Not for sale, Jason. Not for sale. This is sharing, education, my use here, but not for you to buy and take home. What a good guy.
I thought that was a pretty funny sequence.
Yeah, I think pure display of cultural capital is very difficult. Would you be able to answer that, actually?
I have one example. Was spending time with Stephen Oolong. He invited me over to have tea while I was doing some work in his area. Stephen is a scholar extraordinaire, writes his own blog, Tea Sophie, and is a greatly appreciated subscriber. And so having tea with him, topics of conversation come up. We're running through many different things. Stephen is incredibly knowledgeable. But we did get onto a topic. I asked a question, and he said, well, let's look up that reference. And he had a wonderful collection of reference books on tea and topics related to tea, and knew immediately at hand, not the answer to the question, but where to find the answer, which reference to use, and where in the reference we would find such an answer. And so it was just a pure display of cultural capital, not citing things or repeating things that one has said in the past, but actually having a collection of books and references, being able to use those references, and having those types of answers at hand to develop new knowledge. I think that was probably the purest display that I may have ever seen.
I certainly feel jealous of that experience. So once Delta variant or anything else clears up with COVID, Mr. Oolong, I think we'd all love to have tea with you.
Do you see the propagation or ossification of our tradition's classification systems as self-reinforcing?
Can you clarify what you mean by self-reinforcing?
Well, we create the classification systems, we propagate the classification systems, the individuals who are taught the classification systems go on to apply those classification systems. Do you see that creating reality? Do you see reality rebelling against that? Do you see things that violate the classification systems? Or do you see that most things fall in line because the classification system exists? Which way does the causality grow?
I think good classification systems are robust and that they are self-reinforcing. Any classification system that has a ton of exceptions or is complicated or difficult to remember isn't going to be propagated. So
I'm specifically asking about our classification system within tea and within the tradition of tea that we practice. Is it self-reinforcing?
I would say yes as well, especially I think being a little closer to the mainstream consumers as well as our practice. I would say on the mainstream side, people who maybe aren't diving into very specific, appellations, peaks, valleys, etc., where very specific teas are grown from a large, broad brushstroke standpoint. Things like oolong, green tea, black tea are pretty well understood. And I think that what people have experienced helps to define those experiences as they go forward. I would say that, and I think you write as much, classification systems don't have to be correct. And so certainly we find instances to our classification system where we find that something might be placed in a category and you study for long enough and maybe you don't agree with something. But that doesn't mean that you won't see it pop up over and over and over again. And that is because I believe our classification system is self-reinforcing.
Largely because it's useful. It doesn't even need to be correct, so long as it serves its utility.
So you would both say that our classification system progresses the praxis?
I don't think that's an A to B. I think, it's useful. It's used both by practitioners like us and by the broad, consumer base. I don't know that it is pushing forward our praxis, but I believe it allows for evolution within tea manufacturing. And of course, I think that evolution will be important to continued growth of the practice.
Also as a teaching tool. And it's foundational for anyone who wants to learn anything about tea. Well, how do you make distinctions without a classification system?
By thine own eye and tongue.
At that point, would everything be subjective then?
Is it not subjective now?
I guess there's some shared understanding, but certainly, there's some degree of subjectivity as well.
Agreed. Let's end on a set of short questions in a new game called Classifying or Classifier. If it's something that you use in which to judge others, you'll say classifying. If it's something that you yourself do, you'll say classifier. Our first one is cha-chongs. Ryan, classifying or classifier?
Classifier means that I use that to make judgments.
Classifier means that you use a cha-chong.
Oh.
Classifying means you judge others' use of cha-chongs.
Classifying.
Ooh, classifier. You all know that I have Pishu, my cha-chong of a decade at this point, maybe more, decade plus. He's got a very nice patina, although I still do clean him, just like my teaware.
Electric kettle.
Both classifier and classifying.
Same. They're incredibly useful. I also much prefer to use a tetsubin.
Yeah, there's an economic cost to a tetsubin, but I'm making my way there.
Shopuer.
Classifier. I love shopuer.
Same, classifier. I have nothing against shopuer. Really like it.
Shopuer in a thermos.
100% classifier. One of the best ways to drink it.
Classifying. Oh, I hate it. It turns into wet cardboard so quickly.
Just got to use that technique, Ryan. You're not using the right technique. I will agree, not every shopware is made for a thermos.
Clay gaiwans.
Classifying.
They're horrible.
Yeah, I also just think if you want to dedicate a vessel to a specific product, specific tea, just get a Yixing.
Tea timers. Hourglasses or egg timers.
Classifying.
Agreed. Classifying. Part of the gong fu, knowing how long to let your tea steep.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is building up that innate intuition, experience, knowledge base to not need a timer. But that is not to say that I never use timers. I totally use them at work or when I'm doing competition style brewing, right? So if we're trying to draw out the flaws in a tea, I'm not going to sit there and gong fu it. I'm going to brew it for 5 minutes at boiling.
Large format Chinese restaurant style teapots.
Classifier. It's perfect for dim sum.
Agreed. Classifier. Perfect. Absolutely perfect for dim sum.
Or if you want to do some Ming Dynasty style, nice light green tea, you can always do that too.
Boiling water with charcoal.
I wish I could say classifier. Classifying in a very positive way.
Classifying.
So I think we both wish we had the resources to boil water with charcoal here, but we don't. We did at the Tea Institute at Penn State, and it was a lovely experience.
Actually, the last time we ever boiled water with charcoal was when you were there, Pat, in 2014. That was the last time charcoal was ever lit in the tea house.
And that was because the fire marshal shut us down.
Although you did that great thing as it was cooling down, you put that green tea over it on the soji paper or wagashi paper, and some of the best green tea that I ever had at the Institute. It was really high quality base material. It was just a little old, but it brought it back to life.
That could be another good question for classifying or classifier.
Self-roasted green tea. Wagashi paper over a charcoal fire.
Not the charcoal part, but over heat for sure. Classifier. I definitely re-roast some of my old teas.
Classifying. It's a skill I have not yet mastered. I've tried it once or twice, and it's very hard.
Aging water.
Classifier.
Same. Classifier.
Wait, I've seen your water aging jar. It's empty.
I age my water in a glass jar right now.
Classifying.
So Jason and Ryan, for context, both have Ongi water aging jars. I do have my water sitting with bamboo charcoal, but mine is also just in glass. So maybe I'm classifying and not classifier.
Well, that is all the time that we have for today. Thank you, everyone, for joining us in this edition of Tea Technique Editorial Conversations. Please join us again for a discussion of the next chapter, Wealth and Knowledge in Contemporary Chinese Tea Ceremony, Confucian Life, Confucian Mind.